Film censorship has been around almost as long as cinema. Since the turn of the 20th century, movies have been restricted or banned if they contained material that was deemed inappropriate, profane, or blasphemous. Since horror is the most likely to harbour obscene or grotesque content, the genre regularly finds itself in the censor board's firing squad. Now, we have already done a video on this very topic, but there was just too many more to talk about. So I'm Ellie with What Culture, here with 10 more horror movies that got banned from certain countries. Number 10, The Last House on the Left, Australia, United Kingdom and United States. Wes Craven has caused a stir time and time again with features like Scream, A Nightmare on Elm Street and The Hills Have Eyes. However, nothing caused as much outrage as the horror maestro's directorial debut. The Last House on the Left depicted sexual brutality on a level rarely seen in cinema at the time. According to Craven, the story is a commentary on how violence in media is glorified when it should be condemned. Sadly, a lot of people missed the point, assuming Craven's work was promoting anarchy. Due to Australia's harsh policies, the movie wasn't available in the land down under until 2004. Even though The Last House on the Left was heavily edited for the US, there were reports of audiences vomiting during screenings, storming out and threatening to destroy the footage. The Last House on the Left was released in the UK, but only after explicit scenes were removed. The censorship board redacted this decision several years later, banning it entirely. Film critic and horror virtuoso Mark Kermode repeatedly presented the movie to the British censors, hoping that they would overturn the decision. After being worn down for nearly 2 decades with multiple appeals, The Last House on the Left was finally released in the UK in 2008. Number 9, Possession, United Kingdom. Possession revolves around a spy, Mark, whose life falls into disarray after his wife Anna suddenly leaves him. Desperate to uncover the truth, Mark discovers his wife's recent actions stem from something far more disturbing than he could have ever imagined. Even though Possession contains scenes of refrigerated body parts and fornicating monsters, it's the moment when Anna suffers an agonizing miscarriage that's sure to rattle anyone. Believing this sort of material wouldn't fly with an American audience, a recut version was released in the US. However, the truncated version was still considered too extreme for the United Kingdom. During this period, the British Board of Film Classification enforced restrictions on movies that were deemed inartistically vulgar, violent or gory. Any feature that found itself in this bracket was referred to as a video nasty. Of the 72 films that fell victim to the BBFC's wrath, Possession is among the most infamous. Although the psychological drama had a brief run in British cinemas, its home release was banned until 2000. Despite being initially met with scorn and revulsion, time has been kind to Possession. Nowadays, it's considered the director's finest work and arguably the best movie to be labelled as a video nasty. Number 8, Hostel Part 2, Germany. Due to its explicit content, Eli Roth's Hostel popularised the term torture porn months before it hit theatres. Since this wince-inducing horror contains scenes of snipped eyeballs, blowtorched faces and drilled kneecaps, it's easy to see why. Little did horror fans know that Roth was saving the real nasty stuff for the sequel. Although Hostel Part 2 has a slew of revolting imagery, there's a particular scene that had everyone up in arms. Around the halfway point, the sadomasochistic Mrs. Bathory kidnaps one of the characters, Lorna, dragging her to a secluded room. When Lorna awakens, she finds herself gagged and naked while hanging upside down. Using a scythe, Mrs. Bathory slices off chunks of Lorna's back, stomach and neck while showering in her blood. In most countries, this scene, among others, was heavily censored before the film was distributed. However, Germany took things to the extreme. The censorship board there found this scene to be so disturbing, it was cut entirely, including on the so-called extended version. Eventually, a Munich court decided this restriction wasn't good enough and had all versions of Hostel Part 2 banned. Number 7, Mikey, United Kingdom. There are plenty of horror flicks that deal with the concept of a killer kid. The Omen, The Good Son, The Village of the Damned, and then there's Mikey. That creepy thriller centres around an orphaned boy who's taken in by a foster family. Over time, his new mother and father discover Mikey slaughtered his original family and intends to do the same to them. It's understandable why Mikey should have provoked a controversy, since it depicts a 9-year-old burning his victims alive, drowning them, stabbing them with glass shards, and electrocuting them in the bathtub. And yet, Mikey secured a worldwide release without causing much of a fuss. However, there was one country that took umbrage with the film's subject matter: the United Kingdom. If Mikey was released earlier, there would have been no issue. However, Mikey was submitted to the British Censorship Board the same year 2 minors in Liverpool carried out a murder. Believing the concept was too close to home, the Censorship Board consulted child psychologists and police officers to discuss the matter. After much deliberation, it was decided not to distribute Mikey in the UK. Number 6. The Devils, Finland. There are some films that were once considered controversial but are deemed pretty tame by modern viewers. Psycho caused a hullabaloo in 1960 because it was the first feature to depict a toilet flushing. Nowadays, such a display isn't a big deal. However, The Devils is so controversial by today's standards, it's hard to believe the film made it into theatres in 1971. Ken Russell's historic drama was always going to cause a scene, since it blends 3 touchy subjects together: torture, sex, and religion. Considering The Devils contain scenes of a priest's knees being pulverized, a woman having sex with a bone, and naked nuns defiling a religious statue, the director should have known that his work would be torn apart, not just by critics, but by censors. Due to the subject matter, The Devils couldn't be released until it was heavily edited. However, government officials in Finland believed the movie's heinous content could affect the mental health of viewers, encouraging the censorship board to ban it outright. Despite several attempts to reverse this decision, The Devils was forbidden from being distributed in Finland until 2001. Number 5. Mother's Day, Australia, United Kingdom, and Germany. Mother's Day kicks off with an elderly woman and her 2 deformed children garroting and decapitating a young couple. As brutal as that prologue is, it's only a taste of what's to come. Since the film deals with inbreeding, torture, rape, castration, and smothering a person with inflatable breasts, yep, really, it would have been pretty baffling if this grisly slasher didn't get censored. Mother's Day caused uproar with British censors. I mean, are we really surprised? Leading to it being removed from distribution. Despite being repeatedly aired on British television, Mother's Day wasn't released on home media in the United Kingdom until 2015. Even though Australia is incredibly strict with how violence is depicted in media, Mother's Day was released there uncut in 1983. 2 years later, the Aussie censors had a change of heart, or maybe came to their senses, and had the film banned. Even though these measures are harsh, Mother's Day suffered the most scrutiny from Germany. Not only was it refused classification, the authorities confiscated all film reels to make sure it was virtually impossible for anyone to get their hands on a copy. Number 4. Maniac, New Zealand. Maniac revolves around serial killer Frank Zito, who scalps women and uses their hair to craft wigs for his mannequins. Due to the brutal content, Maniac had serious trouble finding distribution. In fact, Maniac has only been legally distributed in the United Kingdom since 2022. Since the 2012 remake maintained the same gruesome premise as its predecessor, the movie caused another public outcry, this time in New Zealand. However, it wasn't Maniac's content that irked New Zealand, but its presentation. Unlike the original, the 2012 version depicts the entire story from the point of view of Frank, giving the impression the viewers are performing his heinous actions. The Australian Classification Board, which governs film distribution in New Zealand as well, was concerned by this style, believing its first-person portrayal and packaging as entertainment is likely to lead to erosion of empathy for some viewers. For this reason, the censorship board believed it was in their citizens' best interests to have Maniac banned theatrically and on DVD. Although Maniac can be screened in festivals and for academic purposes, its distribution is strictly forbidden. Number 3. Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, Hong Kong. If a movie could be banned solely because it was terrible, Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey would never see the light of day. Even though the idea of the honey-loving bear going on a killing spree is amusing, the underwhelming slasher does nothing with its bonkers premise. But since a movie can't be banned on the grounds that it's awful, Blood and Honey received a worldwide release. However, the film wasn't allowed to be shown in Hong Kong. Strangely, it wasn't the horror element that was the issue, it was Winnie the Pooh. After the character was used in a meme to mock Chinese leaders, Winnie and his whimsical friends received heavy censorship in the country. Although toys and books of Winnie, Tigger, Piglet and Eeyore are still available in Hong Kong, movies centered around the ensemble are forbidden. As such, Blood and Honey was banned, and it's a safe bet the sequel will suffer the same fate. I don't really think they're missing out. Number 2, Frankenstein, Ireland. Despite Frankenstein's legacy, this adaptation of Mary Shelley's sci-fi novel has always been marred with controversy. Many scenes were edited or cut entirely from its original release, including the sequence where the monster drowns a little girl. In fact, that scene was thought lost for decades and was only inserted back into the movie during the 1980s. Many religious factions were offended by the concept of a man creating life, especially when Henry Frankenstein compares himself to God. To avoid offending anyone of faith, the sound of lightning was inserted during this line, making Frankenstein's claim inaudible. However, these cuts weren't good enough for Ireland, since Frankenstein was banned in the Emerald Isle almost immediately after it was distributed there. An Irish censorship member stated, "I cannot issue a general certificate licensing this film for exhibition to audiences containing children or nervous people. It is a horror, and notwithstanding its grotesque absurdity, its cruelty and brutality would have a demoralizing effect on many. I reject the film as being unfit for exhibition even to an adult audience, as it panders to the morbid and unhealthy-minded." Even though the Irish censors came down hard on Frankenstein, the decision was overturned after only 1 month. Number 1, Freaks, United Kingdom. After the blinding success of Todd Browning's Dracula, it looked like the director was about to become a Hollywood powerhouse. 1 year later, the iconic filmmaker released his follow-up, Freaks, which centered around a troupe of abnormal sideshow performers. Freaks may have been the talk of the town, but it wasn't for the reasons Browning was hoping for. Although modern viewers mightn't think the movie is controversial, that's because they haven't watched the original version. In fact, nobody alive today has seen the first cut of Freaks, since 30 minutes of content was removed and destroyed shortly after its release. As a result, scenes depicting Hercules being castrated and the troupe mutilating Cleopatra have been lost forever. As far as we know, the truncated 64-minute cut is the only version that exists. This abridged edition wasn't good enough for the British censors, who believed the film's reputation had been tainted beyond repair. When a woman tried suing MGM on the grounds that watching Freaks caused her to suffer a miscarriage, it makes sense why the British censors wanted nothing to do with the film. Due to the controversy, Freaks didn't see distribution in the UK for 30 years.